Welcome to another episode of Digital Dive Media Podcast. I'm your host, Kelly Kelly. This is episode 5, and I'm speaking with Jeff Perkins, CMO of ParkMobile. ParkMobile is the leading provider for on-demand and prepaid mobile payments for on- and off-street parking. So translation, it is the answer to the pain in the behind of having to run out from your event or wherever you are and refill the meter. I remember when ParkMobile first hit Atlanta, it was such a delight to me because that is like such a nuisance to have to leave what you're doing and go refill the meter. So when I found out there was an app that all you had to do was press a button, I was like, this is great. So thank you so much for being with us, Jeff.
Thanks, Kelly. Thanks for having me.
And I wanted to start off, can you give us a little bit of background on your career and how you got started?
Sure. So I actually started my career in New York City in the advertising business. So I had the good fortune out of college to get a job at a large global agency called Saatchi & Saatchi, and I was assigned to the Procter & Gamble account. So I worked on Tide laundry detergent and Cascade dishwashing detergent, all while I was a 20-something who lived in a 300 square foot apartment without a dishwasher or a laundry machine. So I really had to learn a lot about how to study a target audience because I obviously was not the target. So I started in advertising, had a great 10-year career that ran from consumer packaged goods to I ended up working on the Volvo account. So I was leading digital marketing for Volvo, and I was having a lot of fun, and that was a great experience. And around 2007, my wife and we were pregnant with our first child. And so living in Manhattan in a 300 square foot apartment with a baby seemed like something that would be a challenge. And right around that time, I got a call from a company in Atlanta called Autotrader.com. They had an interesting position. So I was looking to get out of the city. Autotrader seemed to really have something good happening with their company, and so there was a nice fit. So I made the move from New York City down to Atlanta. I had a great 5-year run at AutoTrader, and since then I've gone on to work at a couple companies. One was called PGI. So I went from AutoTrader, where I was a marketing manager, marketing director. PGI took on my first vice president of marketing role. That led me to a local startup here called QA Symphony. That brought me in as CMO, and then ParkMobile brought me on as CMO at the end of last year. So this is my second CMO gig, but I've had a nice run, and I think the fun thing about my career is that I've been able to kind of jump between agency side and client side. I've worked in B2B and B2C. I've worked across tons of different industries. And I've worked enterprise and startup, so I feel like I've really kind of seen it all, and that's, I think, important for marketers, that you're very agile and you're able to kind of adapt to new environments, to new industries, to new situations, and that served me very well throughout my career.
So you've had such a long career, and I think anyone who's been in marketing or communications for any length of time, maybe a decade, has seen so many changes. I started in traditional PR, and when I started to see the change that digital was having an impact on business, it encouraged me to make some pivots. What was the point in your career that you realized digital was going to be an important function of business?
I think it was actually very early on in my career. I've always been someone that's been, an early adopter of technology. And I remember even growing up, we were the first people in the neighborhood to have the internet. And back then we had what was called Prodigy Internet through the phone line. And then we graduated to AOL. But I was always kind of on the forefront of these things, where I was always trying them very early on and using things like the internet before it was the internet. And so when I got into advertising out of college, a lot of my first projects were around television advertising, and so I was doing big budget TV ads for Procter & Gamble and for some of my other clients, and that was really fun. But at that time, digital advertising was really starting to emerge. And that served me well in my career because I was always a digital native. So I really understood digital advertising and what brands needed to do, both from how they had to build out their websites, what they can do from a display advertising point of view. Remember, back in the mid to late 90s, there was no Google at that time.
Yeah.
And so you were doing a lot of banner ads and you were building websites. And I remember working on the Tide account, and we built something that was called the Stain Detective, which was like an interactive app where you could put in the kind of fabric that you got a stain on, the kind of stain. So it was a ketchup or red wine, and it would kind of spit out a solution to how to get that stain out of your garment. And at the time, it was like revolutionary. Like no one was thinking about using the web for that kind of application. And so it was a really cool way to bring a traditional brand like Tide laundry detergent online and make it very relevant and useful to consumers. So I started seeing that, and early on I kind of pivoted from the traditional advertising to digital. So I went into a company called DDV, which is a traditional ad agency, but I went into their digital department there. And I got to work on clients like Michelin and Hasbro. And these are companies that were really trying to figure out digital at a really early time. So that was a great opportunity for me to work with some really big clients at the same time, really to help teach them digital and evangelize digital for them and for the agency. And since then, I never really looked back. So I took a job at Euro RSCG running digital for Volvo. And that was at a time where actually the digital team was becoming more important to Volvo's business than the traditional advertising team.
Wow.
If you thought about automotive advertising over time, you'd always think about these big ad campaigns and Super Bowl ads. But really all the attention and all the focus was on digital, because digital was driving their business. Digital was driving people into the dealership to do a test drive. And it was very accountable and trackable, unlike some of the traditional media. So I've always kind of been highly engaged in digital, and I've seen kind of every iteration from the search engines coming kind of into the fold, then to the social media sites coming into the fold. And what's great about it is there's always something new to try. There's always something new to test out, and you can test and learn and track. And as a marketing person, the old way of doing marketing was really you bought 52 weeks of television, and you would test the television ads, and you thought it would work intuitively, and it seemed like as long as business was going up, you gave credit to the television ads.
Mm-hmm.
But with digital, you really had the ability to look at attribution on a much more granular level. What kind of leads does a search engine drive versus a social media site versus a content site? So that's really exciting. And as a marketer, being able to show the results of your campaigns to your executive team and to your board on a really granular level really is something that gives you as a marketer a lot more. It gives you more legs to stand on. It helps you. So if you want to go ask for more budget, you are able to.
Yep.
Because you could say, well, we tried this. It worked really well. Here are the results. Here's the revenue it drove. So we want to add more budget, and here's the case for that. So it really makes our job as marketers, I think, it doesn't make our job easier, but it helps us make the case in a real way to our executives that we should be spending more money in advertising, because you can track the ROI, you could track the results you're generating.
And so as CMO, when your team comes to you with ideas of new things they want to try, because things are always changing and maybe they're just keeping a pulse on that, what's the best way for them to get you to buy into an idea that's just new and cutting edge?
Yeah, my view is, we should be trying everything. And, as long as it's a modest investment, you can't some things you can't just try. Some things, if you want to buy a new, if you want to buy a technology tool for email, that's not something you try. That's a big investment. It has to be very thought out. There has to be a clear process for you, how you evaluate, select a vendor, and then implement. But with a lot of media options out there, it's pretty easy to try and fairly low cost. So if you want to try out campaigns in social media, that you can do that on a very modest budget, and really that you could see right away what the results are. If you want to try pre-roll video advertising online, if you want to try retargeting, I mean, these are all things that you can do at a fairly low cost, and probably things you should be doing in testing. So probably for my team, it's not really hard to sell me on testing a new tactic or doing something new or trying something new, as long as the investment is going to be modest, right? The thing we don't want to do is say, hey, we're going to invest 6 figures in this new thing. We think it's going to work. We much rather test our way into new tactics, into new things. So we know going in that, well, we think this can drive this amount of revenue based on the testing we've done. So that's how I always look at it. I think one thing I try to do is take 80% of our program budget and say, okay, these are the programs that are going to drive the business. These are things that we know work reasonably well. And so we're going to invest 80% of our budget in these programs. But then the other 20% of the budget, you say, all right, this is the budget we're going to use to experiment. This is the budget we're going to use to find the next big tactic that we're going to add into that 80%. And I found that to be a very good way to constantly be testing new and interesting ideas. When you say, all right, I'm keeping this budget here, come to me and make the case for it with all these new things, the team feels kind of empowered to go out and find a lot of new options for us. So that's always the way I've approached it. I think brands today just need to be trying all the latest tactics out there, whether it's a new social platform, whether it's a new way to do display advertising, whether it's programmatic buying. I mean, you have to constantly be trying these new things, because what I've found that sometimes when you're trying them, and especially when you're early on in some of these new tactics, they can work extraordinarily well. One example, Google launched a program, this was a couple years ago, but it was in Gmail, where basically if people had certain terms in their Gmail inbox, you could target those people with advertising.
Oh, wow.
And so that was pretty cool, because you could say, all right, I was at the time working for a company called PGI that made a web conferencing solution. And we were competing very heavily with GoToMeeting. Mm-hmm. And so if I knew people were attending a lot of GoToMeeting meetings, because in their inbox they have a lot of GoToMeeting invites, I can then serve them up with an ad about why we were better than GoToMeeting. And I found that to be a very clever way to use media. Now, some people get concerned with that kind of media, that there's privacy issues, but we didn't know who those people were. We had no idea. All we knew was in their inbox, they had some mentions of WebEx or GoToMeeting, and so we can then target them. And so for us, that was a really interesting tactic, and we tried it, and we were very early on. And the results we were getting were like 10x any other digital result we had at the time. And so we were very excited about that. And I think a big reason why we were getting those great results was because it was so new and not a lot of people were doing it. And then once a lot of other advertisers jumped in, it became less effective over time. But that's one reason why you really want to always be trying these new things, because when you are early, you do really have an opportunity to capture more attention and get better results.
Do you find that at your level, other CMOs are starting to adopt that idea more, that they just need to try, even if it's not native to them, like it's sort of native to you? Other CMOs that maybe in businesses or industries where they didn't come up with it, it's a little scary, it's a little unknown. Do they share the same thoughts as you, or do you see that changing more?
it's a good question, and it's hard. It's a hard question to answer because I interact with a lot of CMOs. I have a fairly active peer group, and I think everyone's kind of different, and it all depends on the business, the industry, their budgets, the corporate appetite for experimentation. So I think it depends. I think it really depends. I do think you see a lot of CMOs today, not necessarily always trying to experiment or trying to do new things, but trying to do things that are going to help them make a stronger case for the value of marketing within the organization and for the revenue or leads that marketing could provide to the organization. That's a big change that I've seen with CMOs maybe 15 years ago and today. CMOs are much more revenue focused, much more results focused than maybe they were in the past when you didn't have the ability to track like you do today.
Right.
So when you're a CMO, you really your job is not just to be the builder of the brand anymore. Your job is to really be the driver of the business and be the person that is really looking at all the ways that you could impact the business, that you can help the sales team, and that you can help the company make their number.
What's the most uncomfortable thing you've done to grow business?
Probably the most uncomfortable thing I've done, and this was in my previous role at a company called QA Symphony. We were a startup. We were, when I joined the company, we had about $1 million in revenue, and we were a challenger brand. We didn't have as many customers as a lot of the other brands in the category, and so we were pretty aggressive and we were pretty scrappy. And one of the things that happened early on in my tenure there was that we were seeing one of our competitors was they were buying search engine ads, and they were kind of doing a little bit of a deceptive practice where they were presenting a search engine ad as though you would think it was an ad from QA Symphony, and they were driving to their own landing page.
Oh, wow.
So if someone searched for QA Symphony, they would have an ad that said, "Hey, learn about QA Symphony here," and then you would get to their landing page that would be about how they're better than QA Symphony. Now, it's a bit of there's some gray areas in search engine marketing, and some people, if you're not watching it, some people might do that and might get away with it. We had a trademark brand term, so really they were using that in their advertising, which is not allowed by Google. And so we were looking at these ads, and we said, wow, we should contact Google and make sure that we get these ads taken down right away. And so we did that, but we knew that would take a little bit of time as Google, did their research and tried to figure this out. So what I decided to do to be a little bit more aggressive was to publicly shame them on social media. So I from my personal Twitter account, just started taking screenshots and tweeting to this company, asking them why they were doing this, tweeting to executives of Google and saying, "Hey, why are you letting this company do this? This is bait and switch."
Whoa.
And then the company started coming back and saying, accusing me of that I was lying, and they weren't doing this. Whereas I had, screenshot evidence that they were doing this. So I really went after this company, and then other people who are influencers in the industry started seeing this and weighing in on it. And it was kind of funny because the company that I was just knocking, they had horrible grammar in their Twitter. So they had typos, and I was making fun of them for their typos. Now I was doing this all in good fun. And my objective was to get these ads taken down. And by the next day, those ads were all down. So it was mission accomplished. So that was a little bit uncomfortable to put myself out there and to directly call out a competitor. But it was also very effective in getting them to take the advertising down. Now, what was really uncomfortable is when I was at a trade show a couple weeks later, and I got confronted by the CMO of this competitor, and we almost had a fight in the middle of the trade show floor. That was kind of uncomfortable too. But when you're a small company, sometimes you can take those chances. And when you're a challenger brand,
Wow.
you can do those kind of things and be more aggressive and really. But at the end of the day, my goal was pretty simple. Like I wanted them to take those ads down. I legitimately did not think it was fair of them to do ads like that.
Yeah.
I thought it was bait and switch. I thought it was bad practice. And really, it's not allowed by Google. So, I felt in a lot of ways I was within my rights to kind of call them out. And it helped us because we got some exposure. Looking back at it, because you always, when you do stuff like that, you always have to, take stock and think about it. Was that the right thing to do? I think it was an effective thing to do, probably from a, in getting them to take the ad down. I think if I had to do it again, I might do it the same way, but it might also, like with my company now, we're a bigger company.
Yeah.
I would probably just reach out directly to the CMO at the competitor and say, hey, we're seeing this. I'd appreciate it if you would take these ads down. Because, but man, when you're in a startup and you want to be scrappy, you could do things like that.
That's pretty savage, but I mean, it works. So it's all good. So which industry thought leaders are you keeping up with and why?
Yeah, it's a great question. So the people I like in the industry, I think Gary Vaynerchuk is, I love his video podcasts. I love his content. His books are great. I think marketers should read what he's doing because, again, he's someone who built a business not in a traditional way with television advertising and building a huge brand, but just through just bootstrapping it and through finding kind of interesting, innovative ways to get people's attention and engage with consumers. So he's great. I always encourage people to follow thought leaders like Jill Rowley, who's actually a sales thought leader. And I think marketing and sales alignment is so important today. So I think for marketers, she's a really important voice in the industry. I'm friends with a guy named Sangram Vajre, who's works here in Atlanta. He's the CMO or the co-founder of Terminus. And he is really one of the pioneers in account-based marketing. So for companies that are doing B2B, really account-based is really the way people are targeting and prospecting clients today. So I highly recommend Sangram. And then, beyond the traditional marketers, I think, inspiration comes from many different places. And so I get as much inspiration sometimes from listening to podcasts by people like Malcolm Gladwell, or listening to, This American Life, where they're just very interesting stories that really make you think and that make you question things that you thought were true. So I think, if you're just going to read marketing and sales books all the time, you're going to kind of get stuck in a mindset. So I also think it's good to, expand your intellectual mindset and your curiosity to lots of different topics, and to be kind of well-versed in a lot of different areas.
Now, in terms of specific industry news related to marketing and digital, what are you consuming to help you keep a leg up on the competition? Are there like websites that you go to on a regular? What are you consuming?
It's interesting. So I read a lot of industry news, basically through kind of like any I kind of have alerts set up around marketing topics. And I actually find that's better than just going to the same, websites. I think there are websites that are just great. Marketing Profs is great. HubSpot's blog is insanely good.
Yeah.
It's interesting because today what you find is a lot of the brand blogs are actually just as good or better than the traditional marketing content providers, which is kind of an interesting shift in the industry. So I'll always look at, and I have Google alerts set up for key topics, and as they come in and I see articles that I think are interesting, I'll engage with them. What's what I find to be more valuable than just reading industry news, though, is having a good peer network that you're constantly in touch with, and you're hearing what they're doing. One of the challenges with just kind of focusing on reading blogs or reading news is that you're always reading a perspective from an editorial team that they want to provide, right?
Right.
So if Ad Age wants to write about hot topics, and that's kind of what they'll always focus on, and there tends to be a people focus on things that are cooler and sexier, but aren't necessarily things that are going to help a CMO drive their business.
Right.
And so having that peer group and being able to have lunches and drinks and breakfasts and coffees on a regular basis with people and pick their brains about what they're doing, what tools they're using, what challenges they have, that's really, for me, the thing that provides the most value.
Now, how did you develop the peer group? And how structured is it? Is it more informal or is it formal? You guys have certain dates set?
I've been in formal peer groups in the past. I was in a CMO group about a year ago, and that was good. Unfortunately, when you're in these CMO groups, sometimes if you travel a lot or your schedule is unpredictable, a lot of times you're going to miss the meetings, and that's kind of what happened to me. Is I kept missing too many meetings, so it wasn't worth it to continue in the group. But what's really what I find is just making the time to constantly have these lunches and drinks and coffees with the people who you respect in the industry, or even just jumping on the phone call if you're dealing with a tough issue. The one thing that I do, I have an email distribution list of people that I respect in the marketing field, mostly in the Atlanta area. And if I have a job opening on my team, if I'm struggling with a decision on, what technology tool I want to buy, or even what technology tools I should be evaluating, I'll always just throw it out there to this peer group. And I have had really good luck. Someone I hired here right away when I joined the company, he came through that email. I sent an email out to this list. He was recommended, and then it ended up working out. So there's formal ways to get involved with the peer group. There's informal ways, but I think the most important thing as you are growing your career as a marketer is to just have a really strong network. And that's not something that you're just going to get because you want to have a strong network. It's something you have to make time for, and it's something you really have to work at. And so it's just been something in my career that I've made a priority. Usually a week doesn't go by where I'm not at least having a breakfast or lunch or something with one of the people that are in my my circle. And so yeah, that's really helped me. And I think that probably has been, honestly, it's probably been one of the most helpful content sources that's helped me drive decisions that I make every day. So I'd highly recommend that to everyone, to kind of build that peer network and build that peer group, and just keep in touch and use them as a sounding board for things you're working on.
Well, it was a pleasure speaking with Jeff Perkins, CMO of ParkMobile. Thank you so much for your time, Jeff.
All right. Thanks, Kelly.